If I had known what that night would lead to, I never would have stepped foot in that ballroom. I would have made some excuse, faked a headache, or even pretended I had to work late. Anything to avoid what I saw, what I felt, when the truth finally stared me in the face. But I went. Naen had insisted, saying it was important for me to meet her colleagues, to finally see the people she spent all her time with. The way she had said it rubbed me the wrong way, like she had something to prove. But I didn't push. I never pushed. I trusted her. That was my first mistake. The second mistake was ignoring the unease in my gut when we arrived at the hotel. It wasn't the kind of party I expected. Too extravagant, too intimate. The kind of corporate event where alcohol flowed freely and personal boundaries blurred under the dim glow of chandeliers. I was never much for these gatherings, but I played along, shaking hands, nodding at small talk, watching Naen move effortlessly through the room. Then I saw him. He was standing too close, laughing too easily. And Naen, she wasn't just indulging him. She was inviting him in, leaning toward him in a way she hadn't leaned toward me in months. Still, I gave her the benefit of the doubt. Maybe I was imagining things. Maybe I was just tired. But then, as I approached, I caught it. The way his hand rested on the small of her back, the way she didn't flinch, and the words that followed, slipping from her lips with zero hesitation. "Oh, he's just a good acquaintance. A good acquaintance." I stood there, my heart pounding in my ears, watching as my wife smiled at another man like I was nothing more than a passing thought. And in that moment, I realized this wasn't new. This wasn't a one-time slip-up. This had history. And suddenly, everything that hadn't made sense in the past few months clicked into place. I could have confronted her. I could have made a scene. But instead, I did something I never thought I'd do. I let go of my assumptions, of my denial of her. I didn't need proof. I didn't need her excuses. I just needed to walk away. And so I did, but not before making sure she'd never forget it. I didn't leave immediately. That would have been too easy for her. Instead, I stayed, watching, absorbing every detail, every micro-expression on Naen's face. I wanted to see if she would flinch, if she would show even the slightest hint of guilt. But she didn't. She was too good at this. The room was alive with music, chatter, and the sound of glasses clinking, but I heard none of it. My world had shrunk down to just two people, my wife and the man she had so effortlessly dismissed as just a good acquaintance. I studied him. He wasn't the type you'd immediately suspect. He wasn't overly handsome, nor did he have the kind of charm that would make women swoon. But he had something else. Confidence, a smugness that only comes from knowing you have control over a situation. I knew that kind of arrogance. It was the kind that came from a man who wasn't trying to win over another man's wife. He already had. Naen was glowing, not the way she used to when she was with me. This was different. There was an ease to her, a lightness in the way she carried herself, like she didn't have to try, like she didn't have to pretend. And that's when it hit me. I was the one she had been pretending with. I gripped the glass in my hand, my knuckles whitening as I forced a calm expression. I wouldn't give her the satisfaction of a reaction. Not yet. The music changed, something slower, something meant for couples. Around us, pairs moved to the dance floor, swaying under the warm glow of the chandeliers. That's when he did it. He reached for her hand. A bold move, one that told me everything I needed to know. I expected Naen to pull away, to glance around nervously, to at least acknowledge the fact that her husband was standing just a few feet away. But she didn't. Instead, she let out a small laugh, the kind of laugh I hadn't heard in years, and let him guide her to the dance floor. I should have walked out right then and there, but something held me in place. Maybe it was morbid curiosity. Maybe it was years of love crumbling into dust before my eyes. Or maybe it was the need for one final confirmation. I watched as they danced, not in the formal, stiff way colleagues might at an event like this. No, this was something intimate, something rehearsed. He knew exactly where to place his hands, how to lead her, how to make her smile in a way I hadn't seen in a long time. And then she leaned in, close enough to whisper something into his ear, close enough that I saw the way his grip on her waist tightened just slightly, close enough that I felt the final, irreparable crack in my chest. I turned to set my drink down, my mind made up. I wasn't going to cause a scene. I wasn't going to throw a fit or demand an explanation. I was going to do something much worse. I was going to walk away from her life entirely, and she would never see it coming. I didn't storm out. I didn't throw my drink or demand answers. That would have given Naen too much power, too much importance. She didn't deserve that. Instead, I stood there, watching her dance with him as if I was already a ghost in her life. And maybe I was. Maybe I had been for months, for years even. I thought back to the late nights at work, the sudden secrecy around her phone, the way she had stopped really seeing me when we talked. The signs had been there, but I had been too much of a fool to put them together. I had excused every moment of distance, every little white lie. She's just stressed. She's been working hard. She's tired. No, she wasn't tired. She was just tired of me. A strange calmness settled over me as I took my final sip of champagne and placed the empty glass on the tray of a passing waiter. There was no point in confronting her. I wasn't going to beg for the truth because I already had it. I wasn't going to fight for a woman who had already moved on. Instead, I walked not out of the party, no, not yet. That would be too easy for her. Instead, I weaved through the crowd, making my way toward the bar at the far end of the ballroom. From there, I had the perfect vantage point. I could see everything without being seen. And that's when I noticed something I hadn't before. The way other people were watching them. Colleagues, acquaintances, even a few of her closer work friends. They were stealing glances, whispering among themselves. Some looked entertained. Others looked uncomfortable. But no one was surprised. And that was the final confirmation I needed. This wasn't new. Everyone knew. Everyone except for the idiot who had been stupid enough to believe in his own marriage. I let out a quiet breath, pressing my fingers into the smooth wood of the bar. I could feel the dull throb of my heartbeat in my temples, but I didn't let myself react, not outwardly. My mind, however, was racing. If they all knew, if they had seen this happening right under my nose, then how long had it been going on? Weeks? Months? Years? I turned away, looking at my reflection in the mirror behind the bar. The man staring back at me wasn't the same one who had walked in tonight. There was something colder in his eyes, something detached. That's when I knew I wasn't going home with Naen tonight. No, I wasn't going home at all. I reached into my pocket, pulling out my phone. My fingers hovered over my banking app before I finally opened it, transferring a significant amount of money into a private account she had no access to. Then, without hesitation, I opened my email and typed out a resignation letter. It wasn't just her I was leaving. It was everything. The job I had taken to support our life together, the city we had built our routine around, the very foundation of what I had believed my future would be. I wasn't going to argue. I wasn't going to fight for a place in her world. I was going to disappear from it entirely, and Naen would wake up tomorrow realizing that, for the first time in her life, she had lost me. I didn't walk out of that ballroom like a defeated husband. No, that's not how I wanted to remember that night. I walked out like a man making a choice and exit on my terms. Not as the clueless fool who had just discovered the truth, but as someone who had already made up his mind about what needed to be done. The air outside was crisp, biting against my skin as I loosened my tie and exhaled. The city hummed around me. Distant traffic, the occasional laughter from a nearby bar, the quiet rustling of wind against the high-rise buildings. I stood there for a moment, staring up at the night sky, feeling a strange sense of relief settle over me. I wasn't angry, not in the way most people would expect. I wasn't shaking with rage or planning some grand act of revenge. I didn't need to scream, didn't need to punch a wall. What I felt was clarity. Naen was gone. Not physically, not yet, but in every way that mattered. She had left me a long time ago. Tonight was just the moment my eyes had finally adjusted to the darkness she had left behind. I took out my phone and scrolled through my saved contacts, landing on the one person I knew I could trust, Theo. Theo and I had been friends since college, before jobs, before marriages, before life got so damn complicated. He was the kind of guy who could disappear off the grid for months at a time but would always answer if I needed him. I hit dial. He picked up on the third ring. "You better have a good reason for calling me this late, man." His voice was thick with sleep, but there was no irritation, just curiosity. "I need a place to crash," I said, watching my breath fog in the cold air. There was a beat of silence before he answered. "Did you finally come to your senses about Naen?" I let out a quiet laugh, shaking my head. "Something like that." Another pause, then a sigh. "Yeah, you can stay as long as you need. You want to talk about it?" "Not yet." "Figured," he muttered. "You bringing anything?" I glanced down at myself. The suit, the dress shoes, the only things I had on me. Just me. That bad, huh? I didn't answer. I didn't need to. "All right," Theo said, his voice losing its grogginess. "Come over." I hung up without another word and started walking. Not toward my car, not toward home, toward something new. The city felt different as I moved through it. Sharper, more alive. I passed by a cafe where Naen and I had once spent lazy Sunday mornings, sipping coffee and talking about nothing in particular. I passed by the bookstore where I had bought her a first edition of her favorite novel on our anniversary. And I felt nothing. No nostalgia, no longing, just distance. By the time I reached Theo's apartment, my decision had already been made. I wasn't just leaving Naen. I wasn't just walking away from a bad marriage. I was erasing myself from the life she had built. By the time she realized it, I would be long gone. By the time I reached Theo's apartment, the weight of the night had settled deep into my bones. It wasn't exhaustion. Not in the way I had felt after long work days or the countless late-night arguments with Naen over nothing. This was different. This was the kind of tiredness that came from realizing you'd been living a lie for longer than you could admit to yourself. Theo opened the door before I even knocked, standing there in his old hoodie and sweats, looking at me the way a best friend does when they already know the situation is bad. "Damn, man," he muttered, stepping aside. "Come in before the neighbors start thinking you're some lost rich guy." I stepped inside, the scent of beer and old books filling the air. His place was exactly as I remembered. Messy, cluttered, but real. Nothing about it felt fake, unlike the world I had just walked away from. Theo shut the door behind me and folded his arms. "So, you finally pulled the trigger, huh?" I let out a breath, running a hand through my hair. She was dancing with him, Theo. Not like co-workers, not like friends. Like someone she had been with before. Like someone she had been with for a long time. He let out a low whistle, shaking his head. "Damn. And you just walked out. What was I supposed to do? Make a scene? Fight the guy? Demand an explanation?" I let out a dry laugh, sinking onto his couch. She would have just lied. She's been lying for months, maybe years. Tonight, I just finally saw it. Theo grabbed a beer from his fridge and tossed it to me. "So, what now?" That was the question, wasn't it? What now? I twisted the cap off the bottle but didn't take a sip. Instead, I stared at it as if the answer might be swirling somewhere inside. "I'm not going back," I said finally. "Not to the apartment, not to that life. I'm done." Theo nodded as if he had been expecting that answer. "You need a plan, man. You can't just vanish and hope it all works itself out." But that's exactly what I planned to do. While I sat in that chair, holding that beer, I made a decision. I wasn't going to explain myself to Naen. I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of a confrontation. I was going to disappear. Not in the dramatic way, not in the way that would leave her chasing after me. No, I would be erased. She would wake up, reach for me in bed out of habit, and find nothing. No note, no phone call, no last conversation. She would check her messages, expecting to see one of my usual, "let's talk when you get home" texts. She would check our shared accounts, our routines, our life, and she would find emptiness. Because when you betray someone, you don't get closure. You get silence. I pulled out my phone, scrolled through my accounts, and started untangling myself from everything. Shared finances moved to a private account. Insurance removed her as a beneficiary. Rent canceled my portion. She could figure it out. Everything that tethered me to her life, gone. She would wake up tomorrow thinking everything was normal, and by lunchtime, she would realize her world had shifted in ways she never saw coming. Theo watched me in silence as I worked, and when I was done, he simply nodded. "Cold," he muttered, "but I respect it." I exhaled, leaning back against the couch, feeling something I hadn't felt in years. Freedom. When I woke up the next morning, it wasn't in my apartment. It wasn't with the usual morning routine of hearing Naen shuffling around, scrolling through her phone, pretending everything was fine between us while she texted whoever she thought I didn't know about. No, I woke up on Theo's lumpy couch, staring at a ceiling that wasn't mine, feeling lighter than I had in years. The previous night hadn't been a nightmare I could brush off. It had been clarity in its purest form, and I wasn't mourning it. Somewhere across town, in that pristine apartment we had built a life in, Naen was waking up to an emptiness she never saw coming. I could picture it. She'd reach for her phone first, scrolling through notifications half awake, expecting a message from me, something mundane like, "Want me to pick up coffee?" or "Let's talk when you get home." But instead, she'd find nothing. No missed calls, no texts. She'd check the time, confused. She'd roll over, realizing I hadn't come home. And that's when the first real wave of panic would hit. She'd sit up, check my side of the closet. Empty. My toiletries gone. My laptop, my charger, my personal files missing. She'd search for clues, something, anything. But there would be nothing to find. That's the thing about betrayal. People like Naen, they expect confrontation. They prepare for it. They have excuses ready, half-truths rehearsed, the right mix of guilt and gaslighting locked and loaded. They want a fight because a fight means they still have control. But silence is what destroys them. I checked my phone, half expecting missed calls. There were none. Not yet. Because Naen still believed she could brush this off, that I was just being dramatic or sensitive. She thought I'd be back. She had no idea. Theo walked in, stretching, scratching his head, looking like a man who had witnessed far too much in a single night. He grabbed a coffee from the counter, took one sip, and gave me a knowing look. "You good?" I nodded. "Better than I should be." He exhaled. "You sure you don't want to?" Nope. He didn't push. That's why Theo was Theo. He knew when to let a man process. And I was processing, not in the way people do after a breakup, where they analyze every conversation, replay every moment, search for signs they missed. No, I wasn't dwelling. I was closing the book. Today wasn't about Naen. Today was about me. I had a new life to start, and she had a lesson to learn. I didn't check my phone that morning. There was no point. Whatever texts or calls were waiting, they were meaningless words from a woman who had already let me go long before I left. I wasn't interested in whatever excuses she would scramble to piece together. I wasn't interested in hearing, "It wasn't what it looked like," or "You're overreacting." I had nothing left to say to Naen. Instead, I sat in Theo's kitchen, drinking a cup of coffee that tasted stronger than anything I'd had in years. Maybe because it was the first one I'd had since realizing I wasn't trapped anymore. Theo watched me from across the table, arms crossed, leaning back in his chair. "So, what's next?" he finally asked. It was a good question. I had built my life around Naen for years, always making sure I was the steady one. The one she could rely on, the one who paid the bills, fixed the things that broke, and supported her when she needed it. And for what? For her to smile at another man like I was nothing? For her to let me walk into a room where everyone knew something except for me? No, I wasn't that guy anymore. I took another sip of coffee, letting the warmth settle in my chest. "I disappear," I said simply. "Not just from her, but from everything." Theo raised an eyebrow. "You mean like, ghost her?" I nodded. "She's going to wake up today realizing she doesn't just lose me. She loses everything I ever did for her." He let out a low whistle, shaking his head. "That's cold." That made me laugh. "No, it's fair. Because here's the thing. People like Naen never realize what they have until it's gone. They assume their safety net will always be there, waiting. That their actions don't have consequences because, at the end of the day, they'll always be forgiven. But Naen, she wasn't getting that ending. By the time she realized I was gone, she'd check our joint accounts and see that my name was missing. She'd go to pay for her coffee on the way to work, and her card would decline. She'd call me, maybe the first time in months she actually needed me, and she'd get a disconnected line. Then she'd call him, maybe thinking he'd help her, and she'd get the same silence. Because I wasn't just leaving. I was erasing every trace of myself from her world, and I knew, without a doubt, that it would drive her insane. Theo leaned back, still studying me like he was trying to figure out if I had finally snapped. So, you're really just walking away? No last words. No confrontation. I shook my head. She's not worth the energy, because that's what people like Naen thrived on. The drama, the confrontation, the attention. But what happens when there's no audience? She would be left alone with her own choices, and that, I knew, was going to tear her apart. By the time Naen realized I was gone, I was already somewhere else. Not physically yet, but mentally, emotionally, in every way that mattered. I was done with the man I had been. The one who excused things, the one who ignored his gut, the one who waited for the respect he should have had from the start. I imagined how her morning unfolded, how the weight of her choices finally caught up to her. First, she would have assumed I was still at Theo's, sulking, waiting for her to come back with an apology, a lie, or some well-crafted excuse. She would have expected me to be hurt but reachable. But when she tried calling, no answer. When she sent a text, undelivered. She would have checked the bank account next because that's who Naen was, practical when it mattered. That's when she'd realize my name was gone. Her frustration would turn into panic. She'd scroll through our old messages, looking for anything, any clue, any hint that I was still lingering in the background, waiting for closure. She would go to my closet and find it empty. She'd pace the apartment, waiting, assuming she could fix this. But there was nothing left to fix. By noon, she'd start calling our mutual friends, the ones she knew I confided in. Theo, maybe, though he wouldn't answer. Others, too. But all they'd have were shrugs and unanswered calls. And then, finally, it would sink in. For the first time in years, Naen would be alone. I had always been the constant in her life, the man she could count on, the foundation she never questioned. She had built her world on the assumption that I would always be there. And now that foundation was gone. It didn't matter what she did next. Whether she ran to the man she had been dancing with or sat in our apartment unraveling the past, trying to pinpoint the exact moment she lost me. It didn't matter because I was already free. And for the first time in a long time, I was finally living.